In this video, I'm going to be giving some advice for future CDT through hikers. So recently on the Pieonthetrail Facebook page, I had someone ask me what would be my advice for future CDT through hikers, and I thought it would make a great subject for a video, so here we go. If you haven't already liked me on Facebook and checked out what I'm doing over there, you can head over to facebook.com/Pieonthetrail, where I share a lot of articles on through hiking and ultralight backpacking. So my first piece of advice for someone looking to through hike the CDT is to be aware that it's a much less populated trail than something like the PCT or the Appalachian Trail. If you've been following the channel for a while, then you'll know that my first major through hike was on the Appalachian Trail back in 2015. The Appalachian Trail is one of the most commonly hiked trails in the entire world, whereas on the CDT we saw very few people. You need to be aware that if you're planning on through hiking the CDT and you're heading out on your own, there's a good possibility that you're not going to come into many other people through hiking the entire trail. I personally do enjoy a little bit of solo trail time, but I was really happy that we started as a group because I'm very much a social hiker. So it really depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking to get out into the woods, be by yourself and just have some solo trail time, then the CDT is definitely going to be the trail for you. The CDT's motto is to embrace the brutality, and you really do need to be going to do that if you're going to head out onto the CDT. The CDT is an extremely varied trail with a lot of extremes. One minute you can be hiking on high mountain ridges with 2 feet of snow, freezing rain and strong winds, and then in another section you're in very dry desert conditions with 100-degree temperatures and no shade whatsoever. So a big piece of advice for the CDT is to just embrace that. Understand that you're going to be going through lots of different extremes out on the trail and you'll do well. My next piece of advice for someone looking to through hike the CDT is to not listen to the fear mongering too much. The through hiking community has a little bit of a bad habit of fear mongering around certain areas of different trails. For example, entering into the Sierras on the PCT, there's always talk about, oh, it's not possible, there's too much snow, there's too much this, and it's exactly the same with the CDT. There are, of course, legitimate risks to going out and through hiking the CDT, but there's also legitimate risks to getting in a car and driving on the highway every day on the way to work. So my advice for people is to listen to what people are saying, do your preparation, understand what's going to be involved in the CDT, but don't take any extreme negative fear-mongering surrounding the trail too seriously. My next piece of advice for someone through hiking the CDT is to send yourself resupply boxes, but be aware that you can find decent resupply at most points along the trail. We sent ourselves a lot of resupply boxes back in 2017. I would estimate maybe about 50% of all the resupplies were sent in a box to us that we'd pre-packaged in advance. And towards the end of the trail, I was very much sick of all the food that was inside that box. There was a few points along the CDT where you definitely would want to have a box sent out to you, but other areas where we had boxes waiting for us, there was pretty good resupply options in place. The options were kind of limited, but you could make it happen if you needed to. And I think as time goes on and the popularity of the CDT just continues to increase, there's going to be more good resupply options along the trail. So now I've tackled a couple of key pieces of advice for the CDT. I want to compare a little bit the Appalachian Trail and the CDT, because I know a lot of people that are potentially thinking about tackling the CDT may have already through hiked the AT, and I think it's good to look at the comparison between the two. Obviously, there's a lot of differences between the AT and the CDT, but here's some of the major ones that kind of spring to mind for me. Bigger miles and longer days. On the Appalachian Trail, I would sleep late, maybe get up, start hiking around maybe 9 o'clock, probably stop maybe 4 or 5. No matter how much daylight there was, we'd normally always stop at 4 to 5. It took me 6 months and 10 days to through hike the AT, which is 2,189 miles. The CDT, we hiked about 2,700, 2,800 miles, and it took us only 4.5 months. Most mornings on the CDT, we were waking up at maybe 7 or 8 a.m. and hiking until it got dark, and we were averaging probably 20 to 25 miles every day on the CDT, whereas I would imagine my average on the AT was probably something more like 10 to 12 miles. In hindsight, I was kind of thinking, oh yeah, but the Appalachian Trail is a lot more straight ups and straight downs, and the terrain's really difficult and this and that. But the terrain on the CDT is also pretty tough. And I was talking about this with one of my good friends, Cheesebeard, and he had spoken to Nemor from Nemor's World, and he was on the Appalachian Trail the same year as us. And Nemor went back out onto the AT in 2017, and he was crushing big mile days from day one. And he said that no, it was not that. It was just the fact that we were kind of noobs back on the AT in 2015. The mindset was very, very different. I was out there to just kind of have fun and enjoy myself and get out into the woods, whereas the CDT was taken a little bit more seriously. It was more about the hiking, less about the partying. Another major difference between the AT and the CDT is how humid the Appalachian Trail is. I'm from the UK, and although I've travelled a lot, I am not used to 100% humidity on summer hiking days. And on the AT, I just remember being so hot and so humid that your entire clothes were completely soaked and they would never have an opportunity to dry. You would fall asleep, wake up and be putting wet clothes on that were wet from the day's sweating the previous day. It was super gross. Whereas out on the CDT, you're in much more like dry desert temperatures. You might be dealing with temperatures that were actually higher. So we were dealing with like 100-degree days on some days, but it was dry. So even if you were sweating, you would sit down and take a break. Hopefully you would find some shade, and that sweat would dry quite quickly. So that's a huge difference between the humidity on the AT and the dry kind of desert hiking more so on the CDT. Something that we definitely took for granted on the Appalachian Trail is kind of how spoiled you are by the trail culture. On the AT, especially at the start, every couple of days we were getting trail magic, whereas on the CDT, I can probably count the amount of times we had trail magic on one hand. As well as that, it's also the infrastructure around the trail. So the towns on the CDT, although you can do everything you need to do, you can get hotels, there's grocery stores and restaurants. On the Appalachian Trail, there's dedicated spots set up for through hikers. You've got dedicated shuttle services, dedicated hostels, and the infrastructure around the AT is just so much more developed. That could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on how you look at it. Like looking back at the AT, I just realized how kind of spoiled we were. If you wanted to be, you could be in town every 2 or 3 days on the AT, whereas the CDT, the sections between towns were quite a bit longer. They were at least every 4 to 6 days, sometimes even a little bit longer. Another major difference is the kind of wow factor that the CDT has over the Appalachian Trail. So many sections on the AT, you're just hiking through this green tunnel, you'll get to the top of a mountain and there won't even really be any views. There's some obviously really epic, beautiful stuff on the AT, but I never thought I'd be doing a through hike again after the Appalachian Trail anyway. And so then when I kind of signed up for the CDT, I was a little bit nervous that I wasn't going to be into it and actually motivated to go out and do another long through hike. But we started in Glacier National Park up in the Canadian border, and day one of the CDT, I was just blown away. I've been lucky enough to travel all over the world and see some pretty amazing things, but the CDT really recaptured my imagination and my desire to go out and see wild places. The CDT is super varied. There's these big open expanses of like mountain range that you can just see mountains as far as the eye can see up into the horizon. And so the beauty of the CDT kind of reinvigorated me. Appalachian Trail was a great experience, but the CDT for that wow factor is just so hard to beat. The Appalachian Trail versus the CDT, I actually found the CDT much, much easier. And many people might be quite surprised by that because they know how kind of wild and extreme the CDT is, but it was easier for me for a couple of different reasons, really. The first one being that, of course, your first through hike, I would say, is probably always going to be your most difficult. I felt like I knew what I was getting myself into on the AT. I'd spent a lot of time camping and backpacking and hiking, but it was tough. There were definitely points along the AT that I never knew if I was going to finish, whereas the CDT, you know, you've already done one through hike, you're pretty confident in your skills, you're more prepared, you're more willing to kind of just accept things and kind of keep moving forward. But I think the biggest difference for me that my head was just in a very different place between the AT in 2015 and the CDT in 2017. I'd grown quite a lot on the Appalachian Trail in many different ways, like emotionally, psychologically. I think I set out on the AT to kind of wander and get lost, and the AT kind of gave me a trail to follow and like a destination in mind. Whereas with the CDT, I kind of had a lot more internal confidence in me, and it was more about just going out, seeing cool stuff and doing something awesome. And the CDT was pretty incredible. So now that's some kind of general advice, and then also kind of a comparison between the AT and the CDT. Now I want to talk a little bit about gear advice for the CDT specifically. I was pretty happy with my setup on the AT, but obviously there's a few changes that I wanted to make for the CDT. Plus, with Pieonthetrail, I'm always getting new gear in for testing and kind of review purposes. Something that I picked up towards the end of the CDT was a reflective umbrella from Gossamer Gear. I wish I'd had it for the entire trail, because there was quite a lot of sections on the CDT with extreme sun exposure and not a lot of shade. So being able to put the umbrella up to get your own little bit of shade was really, really beneficial. Even though I was hiking in a shirt with long sleeves and wearing a baseball cap and using sunscreen, I still got burnt on a couple of occasions, but the umbrella really, really helped. It was also, the temperature was actually cooler underneath the umbrella as well by maybe a few degrees, but that made a big difference when you're hiking in the middle of the day. Something I switched out really early on in the CDT was I ditched my Gore-Tex rain jacket. I figured out quite quickly that I would want to have a rain jacket and rain pants, and I didn't want to spend a lot of money on Gore-Tex rain gear. Plus, as time's gone on, I've learned to not really love Gore-Tex products. So what I ended up picking up was the Frog Togs, the nude Frog Togs, which I've talked about previously. I picked up a pair of those. They kind of look goofy, but they work really well. They're cheap. I had the same set last me the entire CDT, and I was really happy with it. Another thing that I ditched quite soon on was I got rid of my Kindle. I love to read. I read every single day, and I did carry my Kindle for the entire duration of the AT. As I said, we were stopping a lot earlier in the day. We would stop at maybe 4 or 5, make a fire and hang out and eat food. But even then, I would probably lay in my tentie every evening and at least read my book for an hour or so. Whereas on the CDT, we were getting into camp a lot later. We were a lot more tired because we were really pushing the mileage every single day, and I didn't really have that much time to read. So I compromised, I ditched it from my pack. Obviously that got rid of a good amount of weight. And what I would do, I had the Kindle app on my iPhone, and I was just reading my book on my phone. It wasn't ideal, but it was a good compromise, and of course, dropped some weight from the pack. And then the other major difference in gear between, for example, the AT and the CDT is that on the CDT you need traction devices and bear spray. Of course, in all the sections that I needed to carry, whether it be micro spikes or my ice axe or a can of bear spray, I did that. And then as soon as I didn't need them, I ditched them. Obviously, all this stuff does add up weight inside your pack, but they're necessary for you to carry. Something else that got switched out along the way is I moved from a 10-degree quilt up to a 0-degree sleeping bag. When we got down to Colorado, the temperatures were really low. We were dealing with a lot of snow along the way. And on the coldest of nights, I was cold inside that 10-degree quilt. We actually went for a tour of the Big Agnes facilities, and they provided me with a 0-degree sleeping bag called the Orno UL, which I have a review up of on the channel. It was a good bit heavier, but honestly, after the first couple of nights of sleep out on trail with it, I was totally happy with carrying the extra weight. It was super warm. I was worried that the mummy style bag was going to be restrictive, but I didn't find it to be that way at all. Actually, this summer's hiking trip, I'm moving to a sleeping bag again, as opposed to using a quilt. I've picked up the Thermarest Hyperion 20-degree mummy style sleeping bag. The Hyperion is part of their new UL range that's only been out for a few weeks. So I'm excited to test that out over the spring, check that it's going to be warm enough for the summer's hiking trip this year, and I'll report back to you on that a little bit later on. Something that I didn't carry on the CDT, and I'm actually annoyed at myself for not carrying, was some kind of emergency beacon. I think before the CDT, I was trying to save money and I didn't want to carry extra gear. I was trying to go pretty light. But when I look back at some of the situations we were in on the CDT, to not be carrying your own emergency beacon is kind of stupid, in my opinion. A lot of the guys we were hiking with did have something, but of course, if I was you know, 40 minutes in front or 40 minutes behind of those guys and something would have happened to me, I would have been on my own in some really exposed, dangerous areas. So after the CDT, I got on eBay, I found a second-hand spot messenger, and I'm definitely going to be using it on this summer's hiking trip, the PCT next year. I would highly recommend anyone going on a hike like this, just carry that little bit of extra weight for that kind of peace of mind and security if something went wrong. So that's all the advice I have for future CDT through hikers. To see a full breakdown of all of the gear that I carried, you can check out this video right here. And if you have any more questions for me about the CDT, then leave them in the comments below. Thanks for checking out the video, and I'll catch you in the next one.